At 8:14 a.m. November 12, 1944, I was crouched in the mud of Leyte in the Philippines, watching a plane that was probably going to kill me. The white officer, Lieutenant Davis, was screaming orders nobody could hear. The air was full of the sound of tearing metal, that high-pitched, furious whine of a Mitsubishi A6M, the Zero. It came in low, banking out of the sun, its cannons winking. The sand 30 yards ahead of me erupted, a spray of hot coral and shrapnel hissing over our heads. "Keep your head down, Washington," someone yelled. But I couldn't. I could see the pilot. I could almost swear I saw the glare on his goggles as he streaked past. He wasn't aiming at anything specific. He was just watering the garden, treating us like insects. We were the 93rd Infantry Division, the segregated unit. Our main job was unloading ships and guarding the airfield perimeter. To that pilot, we were just soft targets. I felt the familiar weight of my M1903 Springfield in my hands. Wood and steel, a bolt-action rifle from the last war. The Zero made a hard, banking turn, the sun flashing off its red Hinomaru insignia, and began to line up for another pass. This time, he was aiming for our ammo dump. They told us to never fire at planes with rifles. It's a waste of ammo, it's pointless, it's a fool's errand. But as that damn plane came straight for us, I didn't feel fear. I felt anger, a cold, precise anger. I pushed myself up from the mud, braced the rifle on the wet sandbag, and lined up the sight. The problem wasn't the rifle. The Springfield M19903 is a beautiful piece of equipment. It's accurate, reliable, and it fires a .30-06 round that can stop a man cold from 800 yards. I'd spent months at basic training learning to squeeze, don't jerk. I could hit a helmet-sized target at 500 yards, 9 times out of 10. I knew that rifle better than I knew my own father's face. The problem was the target. A Mitsubishi A6M Zero moves at over 300 miles per hour. It doesn't just fly straight, it jinks, it banks, it dives. It exists in 3 dimensions. My target, on the training range, sat still. This one was a Hornet made of steel, spitting 20mm cannon shells, an anti-aircraft gun, a Bofors, fires explosive shells in a rapid thump-thump-thump pattern. It throws up a wall of flak, creating a box of lethal air that the plane has to fly through. A .50 caliber machine gun fires 800 rounds a minute, creating a stream of tracers you can walk onto the target. My Springfield fires 1 round. Then I have to manually work the bolt, eject the spent casing, chamber a new round, before I can fire again. By the time I've done that, the Zero is half a mile away. The doctrine was simple. If you are infantry and Zeros are strafing, you dig in. You find cover. You pray. You let the .50 cal emplacements handle it. But our .50 cal nest had taken a direct hit on the first pass. It was just a smoking crater and twisted metal. We were on our own. To hit a target moving that fast, you can't aim at it. You have to aim where it will be. It's called leading the target. At 300 miles per hour, that plane covers the length of a football field in about 1 second. Even at this range, coming right at me, I'd have to aim at a patch of empty sky yards in front of its nose and pray the bullet and the plane arrived at the same spot at the same millisecond. It's not marksmanship. It's impossible geometry. It's a statistical absurdity. This is why they tell you not to try. You waste a bullet, you give away your position, and you accomplish nothing. You are infantry. Your job is to hold the ground. His job is to own the sky. The rules of engagement are clear. You are the anvil. He is the hammer. And the only thing you are supposed to do is endure the strike and not break. But they never wrote a rule for what to do when you're just too damn angry to follow the rules. Lieutenant Davis, the officer in charge of our platoon, was a man who firmly believed in pilot error, or in our case, the soldier error. To him, the problem was never the equipment, the strategy, or the impossible odds. The problem was always the man. And when the man was black, the problem was obvious. This was my secret knowledge. It wasn't written in any field manual. It was the truth I lived with every day. The white officers of the U.S. Army looked at the 93rd Infantry Division and saw a flaw in the system. They saw us as defective equipment. When our .50 cal emplacement got hit, I knew exactly what the after-action report would say. Negligent cover, improperly dug in, or failure to maintain adequate watch. They would never write, the gunners were overwhelmed by a superior enemy force. They would write, the colored troops panicked and abandoned their post. It was always our fault. We were the slack in the cables. They didn't trust us. We were here to do the heavy lifting, the service part of the service. Dig the latrines, haul the crates, unload the LSTs under the hot sun. We were the mules of the U.S. Army. They gave us the old stock rifles, the M1903 Springfields, while the white boys in the 1st Cavalry Division got the new M1 Garands. They told us it was a supply issue. We knew it was a trust issue. They didn't think we were smart enough to handle a semi-automatic weapon without shooting our own feet. My secret was that I knew this was a lie. The man next to me in the mud, Private Samuel Deacon Harris, was from Philadelphia. He could quote Shakespeare and rebuild a carburetor from spare parts. He was twice as smart as Lieutenant Davis, but here he was, a private, because he'd had the nerve to correct a white sergeant about a supply manifest. We weren't just fighting the Japanese, we were fighting a second, quieter war against the expectations of our own side. We had to be twice as fast, twice as smart, twice as brave, just to be considered half as good. That kind of pressure does something to a man. It can break him, make him hesitate, make him believe the lie. I'd seen it happen. I'd seen good men fail because they were weighed down by that doubt, but I looked at Lieutenant Davis, who was now pressed so flat against the side of a wrecked jeep that he looked like he was trying to merge with the metal, and I knew my secret. He was no braver than me. He was no better a soldier. He just had the privilege of never being questioned. His courage was assumed. Mine had to be proven against all evidence in every waking moment. They saw my skin color as a mechanical flaw, a built-in soldier error that made me unreliable under pressure. And that's when I understood. Because they believed I was incapable, they would never expect me to do the impossible. They would never expect me to even try. To them, me raising my rifle to a fighter plane wasn't an act of war. It was an act of stupidity. Like a monkey playing with a tool it couldn't understand. That's why I had to do it. That Zero wasn't just a plane. It was their doctrine. It was their low expectations. It was their soldier error. And my rifle wasn't just a rifle, it was the only voice I had. The forbidden solution wasn't a piece of wire. It was a thought. The unwritten regulation, the one that governed my whole life, was simple. Know your place. My place was in the mud. My place was to be scared, to dig, to haul, and to die quietly if necessary. My place was to obey Lieutenant Davis. My place was not to be a hero. It was not to take initiative. It was not to attempt the impossible. For a black soldier, to try and fail was proof of incompetence. To try and succeed was proof of arrogance. The only safe path was to not try at all. The Zero was climbing, a graceful, deadly arc against the bright white sky. He was turning for another pass. I watched him. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a force of nature, an extension of a machine. He was everything I was not. Fast, powerful, and free. "Washington," I said, "get your goddamn head down," Davis screamed. His voice was thin and reedy with panic. He was hiding behind the wrecked jeep, his helmet barely visible. "That's a direct order." That was the line. The real one. I could obey. I could press my face back into the stinking mud. I could listen to the Zero's 20mm cannons walk across our position, hoping they missed me. I could let him hit the ammo dump, which was stacked only 50 yards away right next to the tent where our medic, Doc Simmons, was working on Private Hayes, who'd caught shrapnel in the leg. If that dump went up, it would vaporize our entire platoon. And I knew, as sure as I knew my own name, that if Davis survived, he would write in his report that he'd given the order to disperse. But the colored troops were slow to react. We would be blamed for our own deaths. This was the pilot error they relied on. Our error was in our existence. The forbidden solution was to disobey. It was to reject the premise, to reject the idea that my only job was to be a victim, to reject the unwritten rule that a man like me couldn't change the outcome. The solution was to act as if I were a soldier in the real army, the one they showed in the newsreels, the one with the square-jawed white heroes. The solution was to believe for just 3 seconds that the color of my hand on the rifle bolt didn't matter. If I missed, I was a dead man one way or another. Davis would have me court-martialed for disobeying a direct order in combat, for wasting ammunition, for conduct unbecoming. He would crucify me to prove his point. If I didn't try, we were all dead. I looked from the screaming, terrified lieutenant to the oncoming Zero. One was an enemy I was supposed to fight. The other was an officer I was supposed to obey. In that moment, they both seemed like the same problem. They both wanted me to stay down. So I made my choice. I decided to break the regulation. Not the one about wasting ammo, the one about being invisible. I ignored Davis's shriek. I shifted my weight, locking my elbows. I settled the steel butt plate of the Springfield into the pocket of my shoulder. The metal was cold against my skin. I would take the shot. I would do the impossible. I would aim at the sky. This was my unauthorized modification. I was modifying my own purpose. I wasn't a mule anymore. I was a rifleman. As my finger rested on the cold steel trigger, I wasn't just seeing the zero. I was seeing Private Elijah Jeter. Jeter was from Alabama, a tall, skinny kid who loved jazz music and carried a dog-eared picture of his girl back home. We called him Bird because he was always whistling. We came over on the same transport ship. We'd been in the same foxholes for 3 months. He was my friend. A month ago, during the first push inland, we were on a night patrol. Just a simple probe, 4 of us, led by a white corporal named Haynes. We ran into a Japanese machine gun nest that wasn't on any map. It was a bad ambush. The world exploded. Green tracers cut the dark. Haynes screamed, "Pull back!" And we did, scrambling through the jungle, rounds snapping at our heels. When we made it back to the perimeter, we were only 3. "Where's Jeter?" I yelled. Haynes, his face pale and smeared with mud, was already lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "He's gone, Washington. Caught a full burst. He's dead." But he wasn't. We heard him, a low moan out there in the dark. "Help me. Oh, God, help me." I grabbed my rifle. "We gotta go get him." Haynes grabbed my arm. "No one's going anywhere," he hissed. "That nest is hot. He's dead. You go out there, you're dead too. It's a waste of men." "He's not dead, Corporal. That's Jeter. We can't just leave him." My other buddy, Deacon, was right beside me. "I'm not risking a fire team for a man who's already gone," Haynes said. His voice was flat, final. "He's not gone," I shouted, loud enough for the sergeant to hear. "He's wounded. We can crawl out, drag him back." "And what if he's bait?" Haynes shot back. "What if they're just waiting for us to try? I'm not losing 3 more men for 1. The math doesn't work." But I knew the real math, the unspoken math. He wouldn't risk his skin or the skin of any other white NCO for one of us. If I had been the one out there, or Deacon, the answer would be the same. We were expendable. Our lives were within spec for acceptable losses. This was the soldier error in action. We were an error to be written off. We argued. It got heated. Finally, the platoon sergeant came over, a man from Georgia named Beck. He listened for 1 second, then pointed his .45 at my chest. "You stand down, Private. That's an order. We don't risk the platoon for a ghost." Jeter wasn't a ghost. He was 50 yards away, bleeding out in the jungle. We had to sit there, behind our own lines, held at gunpoint by our own sergeant, and listen to our friend die. It took him an hour. The moans got quieter. The whistling, that stopped first. The next morning, the official report read, "Private E. Jeter, KIA, enemy action." But I knew. He wasn't just killed by the Japanese. He was murdered by Corporal Haynes's math. He was killed by Sergeant Beck's acceptable losses. He died because, to them, he was a flaw in the system that wasn't worth fixing. He died because they believed he was already broken. Now, I was looking at that ammo dump. Doc Simmons was in that tent. My friend Deacon was in the trench right next to me, firing his M19-17, a rifle even older than mine. The zero was coming. The lieutenant was screaming, "Get down!" And I thought of Elijah Jeter. This was the same moment, the same math, the same expectation that we would just lie down, follow orders, and accept the loss. I wasn't going to listen to another friend die. I wasn't going to let their math be the only thing that mattered. This time, I was breaking the goddamn rules. The zero leveled off. He wasn't climbing anymore. He had completed his high G turn and was now pointing his nose directly at our stretch of the beach. This wasn't another random strafing run. This wasn't watering the garden. This was a deliberate attack. He had seen the neatly stacked crates of mortar rounds and 50 caliber belts. He had seen the Red Cross painted poorly on the side of Doc Simmons's tent just yards away. He was coming to clean us off the map. Deacon, next to me, was fumbling with a stripper clip, trying to reload his own Springfield. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped the clip in the mud. "Oh no, no, Isaiah." I saw it all in a fraction of a second. The plane, still a distant dot, but growing larger with horrifying speed. The line of its approach aimed perfectly, the ammo dump, the tent. I thought of Doc Simmons. He was a good man from Chicago who didn't care what color you were. He just cared about the wound. He was in that tent right now with Private Hayes, the kid who'd caught shrapnel. They were completely exposed. I thought of Deacon, my last friend from the transport ship, cursing as he dug in the mud for 5 rounds of .30-06, and I heard Lieutenant Davis. "Washington, I will have you shot. I will have you shot myself for disobeying a direct order. Get your head down." He wasn't looking at the plane. He wasn't assessing the threat. He wasn't organizing a defense or ordering a retreat. He was looking at me. His entire world in this moment of absolute crisis had shrunk to one single infuriating problem. A black soldier was not doing what he was told. He was more concerned with his authority being challenged than with the 20mm cannon shells that were about to vaporize his entire platoon. That was the turning point. It was the moment I realized we were completely, utterly alone. There was no leadership. There was no support coming. The 50 cal was gone. The lieutenant was a coward, hiding behind a piece of steel and screaming about regulations. The sky was empty of friendly fighters. There was just me, Deacon, Doc, and the Zero, and the memory of Elijah Jeter moaning in the dark. I had listened then. I had obeyed. I had followed the rules of their math, and my friend died. Now I was being given the same choice: obey the man who saw me as a flawed tool, or act like the man I knew I was. "Isaiah, what are you doing?" Deacon whispered, his voice frantic. He'd given up on the clip and was just staring at the oncoming plane. "You can't watch me," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was calm. It was cold. All the anger, all the rage I felt at Davis, at Haynes, at Beck, at the whole damn system that had brought me here just to die as an inferior, it all just focused. The rage became a diamond-hard point. It flowed from my gut, down my arms, and into my hands. The shaking stopped. I wasn't a black soldier anymore. I wasn't a mule. I wasn't a problem. I was a rifleman, and I had a target. I ignored Davis's screams. I ignored Deacon's gasp. I ignored the impossible geometry and the 300-mile-per-hour wind. The Zero was now close enough that I could see the dark circles of its machine gun ports, like the eyes of a shark. This was my moment, my hangar at midnight. My decision was made. The modification was complete. I took a breath, let half of it out, and felt the trigger. The world shrank. It was no longer a beach. It was just 3 points of existence: the rear sight, the front sight blade, and a patch of empty blue sky. The engine noise of the Zero was a physical thing. It wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration in my teeth, in the wood of the rifle stock, in the mud under my elbows. It was a rising, screaming shriek of imminent death. "Washington, I'll have you hanged." Davis was apoplectic. His voice was just static, a meaningless noise from a world I was no longer in. I tuned him out. I tuned out Deacon's desperate, "Isaiah, don't." I tuned out the distant pop, pop, pop of other men firing uselessly, the whistle of the wind, the pounding of my own heart. All that mattered was the breath. I had 1 round chambered. The bolt was down, locked in. My cheek was pressed hard against the walnut stock. A cheek weld, they called it. My left hand gripped the forestock, my right index finger resting on the trigger. I saw the Zero. It was huge now, no longer a dot. I could see the dark green camouflage. I could see the pilot's canopy, a black void. "Don't aim at the plane. Don't aim at the plane. You aim at the plane, you hit the air he left behind. A rifle bullet is fast, but a plane is faster." This was the geometry. He was moving at 300 miles per hour, maybe 400 yards out and closing. How far in front do you aim? The manual had charts for windage and elevation at 600 yards. It had nothing for this. There was no doctrine for this. I had to guess. No, not guess. I had to know. I remembered shooting ducks back home with my uncle's old shotgun. "You don't shoot at the duck, boy," he'd say. "You shoot at the space in front of the duck. You got to swing with it, feel its speed, and then pull the trigger when your gut says, now." This was the biggest, fastest duck in the world. I didn't aim at the propeller. I didn't aim at the cockpit. I put the front sight blade on a piece of blank, empty sky that looked to be about 3 full airplane lengths in front of him. It felt wrong. It felt insane. It was a patch of nothing. I exhaled. Shh! The world stopped. My breathing stopped. My heart stopped. I let my mind go blank. Let the secret knowledge take over. The knowledge that I was good enough. The knowledge that my hands were steady. The knowledge that the Springfield was true. I let the rage at Jeter's death, at Davis's cowardice, at the whole damn system, flow into my finger. But it wasn't a jerk. It wasn't anger. It was just pressure. Cold, steady pressure. The trigger had 2 stages. I felt the first stage of slack. I pulled through it until I hit the wall, the point of no return. The 0 flew into my sights. My front blade was still on that patch of empty sky. Now. My finger tightened. Crack. The rifle exploded against my shoulder. The recoil was a solid, brutal punch, just as I knew it would be. The sound was deafening, a single sharp clap of thunder that beat back the 0's engine noise for 1/10 of a second. I smelled the burnt cordite from the casing. My eye, staring through the sight, saw nothing but the muzzle flash. I worked the bolt. The action was smooth, automatic. My training took over. Click-schlack. The hot, empty brass casing flew out, spinning. The bolt slammed home, chambering a new round. I did it without thinking. I was ready to fire again. I got my eye back to the sight, blinking away the smoke, ready to acquire the target for a second shot, but there was nothing to acquire. The sky was empty. For a disorienting second, I thought I had blinked and missed him. I thought the plane was so fast that my single shot had been an irrelevant punctuation mark in his strafing run. I was already bracing for the thump, thump, thump of his cannons tearing through us, but there was no sound. The screaming engine noise didn't fade away. It didn't roar overhead. It just stopped. It was replaced by an even more terrifying sound, a high-pitched, metallic screech, the sound of a machine braking. "He's hit," Deacon whispered. His voice was full of awe. "Oh my God, Isaiah, he's hit." I looked up, past my rifle sight. The 0 was still there, but it wasn't flying. It was falling. It was no longer a graceful predator. It was a broken-winged bird, a piece of junk. It was trailing a thick, greasy black ribbon of smoke. It wasn't a clean pass. It wasn't a lucky hit on the wing. The plane was coming apart. My bullet, that single .30-06 round fired from a 30-year-old rifle at a patch of empty sky, had found its mark. I hadn't hit the engine. I hadn't hit the wing. I had hit the pilot. The plane's nose dipped. It was out of control. It had been coming right for us, and now it was diving almost vertically straight at the beach. "Incoming!" someone screamed. We all dove, pressing ourselves flat. There was no time to run. The dying shriek of the engine became a deafening roar as the plane plunged. It struck the beach maybe 200 yards from our position, right on the hard-packed sand near the waterline. The impact was not a Hollywood explosion. It was a brutal, catastrophic crunch of metal folding in on itself, a sound of pure final violence. The landing gear snapped, the wings crumpled, and the fuselage skidded, digging a deep trench in the sand before the whole thing cartwheeled and came to a stop, a mangled heap of smoking ruin. One wing was pointing at the sky. The engine was gone, buried in the sand. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound on the entire beach was the hissing of the hot engine and the crackle of small arms fire from the distant jungle, which now seemed laughably quiet. Then, silence. The Japanese fire stopped. Our fire stopped. Every man in our platoon, and probably every man in the next platoon over, was standing or kneeling, their mouths open, staring at the wreckage. Deacon Harris slowly stood up, the mud sucking at his boots. He looked at me. His eyes were wide as dinner plates. He wasn't looking at me like a friend. He was looking at me like I was a ghost. You did it," he stammered. I worked the bolt again, click-schlack, ejecting the second round, the unfired one, and chambering a third. My hands were perfectly steady. "Just in case he had a friend," I said. My voice was still that cold, flat monotone. I turned my head. Lieutenant Davis was still leaning against the jeep. He was staring at the burning plane. His face was chalk white. His mouth was opening and closing, but no words were coming out. He looked broken. His entire world, his entire understanding of the rules, of soldier error, of what was and was not possible, had just been vaporized along with that 0. He slowly turned his head and looked at me. The hatred was gone. The panic was gone. All that was left was a stunned, hollow confusion. He looked like a man who had just seen a mule get up and quote Shakespeare. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I just settled my rifle back on the sandbag, and I went back to watching my sector. The impossible had been done. The modification had worked. The proof was right there, burning on the beach for everyone to see. The silence on the beach didn't last long. It was broken first by a single sharp laugh from Deacon. It wasn't a funny laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated shock. He slapped me on the back, hard. "You crazy son of a bitch. You actually did it." Then the rest of the platoon, our platoon, the 93rd, found their voices. Men started standing up one by one, emerging from their holes. They didn't cheer, not at first. They just stared. They looked at the burning wreckage, then they looked at me, then back at the wreckage. It was like they were trying to make the two images connect in their brains. "I'll be damned," whispered a private named Calloway. "I saw it. I saw the whole thing. I saw you lead him. Man, that was like something out of a movie." The contagion began. It wasn't a modification you could share like a piece of wire. It was a fact, an idea, and it spread like fire in a dry field. The first to be infected were the white soldiers from the 21st Infantry who were dug in about 300 yards down the line. They had seen the whole thing. They saw the 50 cal nest get hit. They saw the Zeros strafing us, unopposed, and they saw one of those Zeros suddenly fall out of the sky and crash. A group of them, 4 or 5 guys, got up from their position and started walking toward us. They weren't running. They were walking, rifles slung, like men who were coming to look at a car wreck. Our platoon tensed. We didn't mix. Their presence here in our sector was unusual and not exactly welcome. Their sergeant, a big man with a face like a worn-out boot, stopped a few feet away. He ignored me completely. He looked at Deacon. "What happened here? Did you guys get a 30 cal running?" Deacon just shook his head. He was still grinning, but his eyes were hard. "No, Sergeant, we didn't." "Then what the hell hit him?" the sergeant demanded. "A mortar? Did you get a lucky mortar hit?" "No," Deacon said, and his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. He pointed his thumb directly at me. "He did." With that, the sergeant and his men all turned to look at me. I was still sitting behind my Springfield. I met his gaze. The sergeant's eyes flicked from my face to the rifle, to the smoking wreck, and back to my face. I could see the gears turning. I could see him processing the information. A black soldier, a bolt-action rifle, a downed fighter plane. The equation didn't solve. It was broken. With an O3, one of his men said, his voice full of disbelief. "That's bullshit." "You saw it fall, didn't you?" I said. My voice was calm. The sergeant didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared. He was re-evaluating everything he knew to be true. He knew we were just laborers. He knew we were second-rate soldiers. He knew what I had just done was impossible. And yet, the proof was still smoking 200 yards away. Finally, he just grunted. "Huh." He didn't say, "Good shot." He didn't say, "Congratulations." He just grunted, turned his back, and walked away. His men followed, looking back over their shoulders at me, whispering. The contagion was spreading. They went back to their lines, and we could hear them arguing. We heard the word Springfield. We heard the word Zero. By noon, the story was all over the beach. "Did you hear? One of the 93rd boys, one of the colored troops, shot down a Zero with a goddamn rifle. It was a virus. It infected the entire perception of the battlefield." When we went to the supply dump to haul ammo crates that afternoon, the white quartermasters, who usually treated us like thieves, were quiet. They didn't curse at us. They didn't tell us to hurry up. They just watched us. They watched me. They were trying to see who it was. They were trying to see if we looked different. But the most important contamination was internal. It was what happened to our men. The memory of Elijah Jeter didn't go away, but the shame of it did. The feeling of helplessness. My forbidden solution, the act of believing I was a man worthy of fighting back, had spread. Our platoon wasn't the same. The slump in their shoulders was gone. They held their heads up. They cleaned their rifles with a new, meticulous care. They weren't just service troops anymore. They were the platoon with the man who had shot down a plane. We had proven the doctrine wrong. We had fixed the soldier error, and we all knew it. The enemy wasn't just the pilot in the burning Zero. The enemy was Lieutenant Davis. And now, he had to face me. He finally pushed himself off the jeep. He tried to brush the mud and grime from his uniform, a pathetic attempt to regain his composure, to put his authority back on. He strapped his helmet on, adjusting the chin strap with trembling fingers. He was a man trying to rearm himself with regulations. He walked over to my position. He didn't run. He walked with a stiff-legged, deliberate pace. The entire platoon went silent, watching. This was the real showdown. He stopped 5 feet in front of me. I was still behind the sandbag, rifle resting, but I didn't stand. I didn't snap to attention. I just looked up at him. His face was a mess of conflicting emotions. There was still that pale, chalky fear from his own near-death experience. There was a deep, simmering anger that his flawed tool had disobeyed him, but underneath it all there was a profound, shattering confusion. He was the enemy from the P-38 story, the Japanese pilot who knew the P-38 couldn't turn and had just watched it snap roll inside his own turn. He knew I was incapable, and I had just done the impossible. "Private Washington," he said. His voice was a dry croak. He cleared his throat, trying to find his officer's tone. "Private Washington, give me your rifle." I didn't move. "Why, sir?" His eyes flashed. "Do not question me, Private. Hand me your weapon, now." I picked up the Springfield, holding it by the stock, and handed it to him, butt first. He snatched it from me. He held it like it was a snake. He turned it over in his hands. He was looking for the trick. He was looking for the piano wire. This was his only way out. His doctrine, his entire worldview, was based on the fact that I was inferior. If I could do this, his world was a lie. But if the rifle was special, if it had a new kind of sight, if I had somehow loaded an explosive-tipped round, then the doctrine was safe. It wasn't me. It was a piece of unauthorized equipment. "What did you do to this weapon?" he demanded. "Cleaned it, sir." "As per regulations," I said. "What ammunition are you using?" "Standard issue M2 ball, sir. From the same crate as everyone else." He worked the bolt, click-schlack, ejecting the round I had chambered. It spun through the air and landed in the mud. He didn't even watch it fall. He opened the breech, held the rifle up, and squinted down the barrel, looking for... what? Wires. Magic. He found nothing. It was just a rifle, a standard-issue government property M1903 Springfield. He lowered it, his face even paler. The enemy had run out of tactics. He couldn't blame the machine. He was left with only the man. You disobeyed a direct order in a combat zone," he stammered. But the words had no power. They were hollow. "Yes, sir," I said. I could have you court-martialed for this. I could have you shot." "Yes, sir, you said that already." The entire platoon was watching. Deacon had his hand on his own rifle. No one was smiling. Davis knew he was trapped. The enemy had lost. He couldn't court-martial me. Why? Because the white sergeant from the 21st Infantry was still standing on his own line, 300 yards away, telling the story to his men. Because every man in this platoon, black and white, had seen him cowering behind a jeep while I fought. Because he was alive, Doc Simmons was alive, and the ammo dump was intact, all because I had disobeyed. If he tried to bring me up on charges, he would have to testify to all of that. He would have to admit his own cowardice, but he couldn't praise me either. He couldn't write, "Private Washington is a hero." He couldn't recommend me for a Silver Star. Because if he did, he'd have to explain what he was doing. He'd have to admit that the heroics happened in spite of his command, not because of it. He would have to admit his soldier error doctrine was wrong. He was the Japanese high command, trying to understand how his aces were suddenly losing. He was baffled, angry, and worst of all, beaten. He stared at me for another long second, the useless rifle in his hand. He looked at the smoking Zero. He looked at the faces of my platoon, all staring at him. He had no report he could write. He had no regulation for this. He shoved the rifle back at me. "Clean your weapon, Private. You're wasting ammunition." Then he turned, his back ramrod straight, and walked away toward his command tent. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He just left, beaten. He had to go write a report that explained how a Japanese plane had crashed due to ground fire, and he would have to spend the rest of his life knowing that the most heroic, impossible thing he had ever seen was done by a man he despised in direct violation of his orders. His world was broken. He was the enemy, and he had just been outmaneuvered. That rifle shot didn't win the war. It didn't even win the battle for Leyte. But it won our war. The modification was permanent, not to the rifles, but to us. The story of that shot became a piece of folklore in the 93rd Division. It was the story of Washington's Zero. It was whispered from platoon to platoon, from island to island. The details got bigger, of course. In some tellings, I shot him down at 1,000 yards. In others, I used a pistol, but the core of it remained true. One of us had done the impossible. It was our piano wire. It was the secret knowledge, now shared, that the soldier error was a lie. We weren't the flaw in the system. We were the system. Lieutenant Davis never received a commendation. He was quietly transferred to a staff job in Manila a week later, processing supply requisitions. I never saw him again. The official report for that day, which I read years later, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. It stated that our sector came under heavy attack from enemy aircraft and that 1-1 Mitsubishi A6M fighter was downed by concentrated and accurate small arms fire from the platoon. Concentrated and accurate small arms fire. Not a single shot from a single man. Not a disobedient private. It was an anonymous collective act. They couldn't give credit to me, but they couldn't deny the wreckage either. So they buried the truth in the passive voice. Just like Lockheed's engineers, they attributed the victory to analysis rather than to the man on the line. But it didn't matter. We knew. The men who were there knew. Deacon Harris survived the war. He went back to Philadelphia, used the GI Bill to go to law school. Became one of the first black prosecutors in the city. He used to write me letters. He never mentioned the shot, but he'd always end his letters the same way. Keep your sights clean, Isaiah. Keep aiming high. I survived too. I finished my tour, took a bullet in the leg on Luzon and was shipped home in 1945. I returned to Mississippi. I didn't get a parade. I just went back to work. But I was not the same man who left. The unwritten rule was broken. That cold, precise anger I felt on the beach, it never really went away, it just changed. It wasn't the hot, blind rage of a kid anymore. It was the focused, diamond-hard clarity of a man who knew his own worth, who had measured it against impossible odds and seen the proof of it burning on a beach. I never talked much about the war. When people asked, I'd just say, I was infantry, fixed a few problems. That's all. Years later, a historian came to talk to me. He was researching the 93rd Division. He'd heard a rumor, a story passed down. He asked me, is it true? Did you really shoot down a fighter plane with a Springfield? I was an old man by then, sitting on my own porch. I looked at him. I thought about Elijah Jeter, moaning in the dark. I thought about Lieutenant Davis, his face white with fear and rage. I thought about the sound of that single crack and the silence that followed. I told him, the official report says it was concentrated small arms fire, and that's the truth in a way. He looked disappointed. So it's just a story? No, I said. It's the truth, because in that moment I wasn't just one man. I was every man in my platoon. I was Elijah Jeter. I was every black soldier who was ever told to know his place and keep his head down. My hand was on the trigger, but the will of all of us pulled it. That's about as concentrated as fire gets. He never found a document to prove it. My name isn't on any plaque. There's no medal in a glass case. My legacy isn't written in any official history. It's written in the survival of my friends. It's in the memory of Deacon Harris. It's in the fact that I am alive today, an old man on a porch, and not a statistic in one of Lieutenant Davis's reports on soldier error. That's how innovation actually happens in a war like ours, not through engineering, but through defiance. Through sergeants and privates who see the real problem, find a forbidden solution, and don't wait for permission to prove they are men. Stories like mine are often buried by the official reports. They are the unauthorized modifications of history, passed down by the men who were there, not the officers who wrote the summaries. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard, that the real story happens on the line, not in the command tent, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We'd be honored to know where you're watching from. Please leave a comment below with your city or state. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering.